All right, all you freedom-loving boys and girls, no matter where you are in the world, welcome to Mission Critical Podcast, Episode 3. We are your hosts. I'm Mark, and this is...
Redbeard.
I was thinking, I wasn't sure if he was going to say Jeremy or Redbeard. So we're your hosts, Mark and Jeremy, and if you've seen any of our podcasts, you know that we're knuckleheads, so, be prepared, So, a matter of fact, Jeremy, we got to make sure everybody knows, hey, have your adult beverage now, whether it's, tea. In Jeremy's case, I am having a glass of wine. It's 1800 here on, what is today, Jeremy? The 2nd? Yeah, today's the 2nd of May.
Yep.
Yeah, so
that is
2nd of May. It's the day after the death of societies whoever celebrates May Day. Anyway, if you know what I'm talking about there with that joke, then you're a better person than I am, but because I don't even really know what I meant by that. But hey, welcome to episode 3. I'm already rambling. That bodes well for this podcast. We are going to actually
on track.
What is it?
We are on track.
We're on track. Yeah, there you go.
Solid start.
Yeah, business as usual.
Yep.
Hey, in this episode, we're going to sit and talk about NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? It's a treaty. And I know this sounds stupid, I apologize, but America is a signatory. We're a signatory member of NATO. We'll get into a little bit of the history and all that. But what we want to do in this podcast is, given current events, and in current events, actually, it's not just yesterday or today current events. This has been going on for a while. We're going to actually sit and examine NATO. And I think we're going to come at this from maybe 3 salient points. Now, we're not going to do a historical deep dive of NATO. You can go and do your own online research, or maybe you're very familiar, when NATO was signed, but we're going to sit and talk a little bit about the why of NATO, like why does NATO exist and what does it entail? What are we obligated to do? And I think that's the point where Jeremy and I, in our conversations, why we wanted to bring up NATO is
right.
Well, Jeremy, I mean, what do you want to say? Is it because of a fear of entanglement, or why is NATO? Before I get into the rest of the argument, why do we want to talk about NATO from your perspective, real quickly?
And so, when it comes to NATO, I think when we examine NATO, a lot of people look at it as something that's antiquated, kind of run its course. But there's also a lot of important questions, at least from my perspective. How does this affect, general sovereignty of countries? How, are we beholden to certain obligations when it may or may not be something that we should be in or not? Is it, and it's not just affecting us, but people have to realize this affects a large portion of the world. We're talking about staple countries of the world. So not only is it a question, in my opinion, of how it affects the United States and the people here, but and I've had several conversations with people from overseas, and I'm sure some people from overseas as well, but at least the people I've talked to, there's a growing sentiment of disenfranchisement, or being disenfranchised from the idea of NATO, because a lot of people, at least from how it's been perceived by me through the people that I know, and I happen to know several people over in the UK myself, it's not like people, it's just not it. And I think when you look at current events, especially, and it's something we'll talk on, like the war in Ukraine, and you look at the stockpile shortages, you look at a lot of resource shortages and stuff like that. Is it viable for the world? But then from the American perspective, is it constitutional to be a part of it? Is it viable for us? Is there any positive?
Slow down. Okay, yeah. So you just brought up something we didn't talk about, which is, so here, boys and girls, I'm sorry, Jeremy and I, we've said this in the previous videos. This isn't scripted. I mean, it's scripted in the sense that we know what we want to talk about. We do talk for a couple seconds before we hit the record button, but Jeremy just brought up a great point, and I'm just going to highlight that, and then we need to kind of get back. We're trying to do a little bit of a format because we really are working towards keeping these at 1 hour. But Jeremy just brought up the military shortfalls of stockpiles, of munitions, and that's a great point. So what we want to do here, so just give you the premise. So again, what are we going to do? We're going to sit and talk about NATO. Why are we talking about NATO? Well, I mean, you've got to be living under a rock to not see the importance of this. But what I think both Jeremy and I feel is that not very many people are actually having this conversation in a serious manner. Like, okay, hang on, are we possibly going to go to war, World War III in this case, with another nuclear power over an entanglement, right? And it isn't just like, this isn't a question of whether we should have fought the Germans in World War II, or it isn't that type of question.
Right.
This is more of a, historically speaking, why does NATO exist? Because if you look at it from that perspective, what is NATO's purpose? What is its charter? And then you look at where we are in the right here and now. I think it's a logical and it's a very appropriate question. Like, okay, well, why does NATO even exist? Then, as Jeremy just alluded to, we were going to talk a little bit about the quote unquote economics of it. Now, economics can be both in terms of money, resources. I mean, all that stuff basically boils down to money, your capability of doing something. And Jeremy just brought up a great point, which now we will talk about in the podcast, which is, what does this entanglement, I apologize for using that word, but because you can already see I'm setting the stage, I'm coming at it from a biased opinion. I think it's an entanglement, but every treaty, every alliance you have is an entanglement. And then to Jeremy's point, this is now draining resources. And then I think the other point that we're going to bring up is, not only is it, so we've got this historical question, why are we even in NATO? What is NATO's purpose? Then what is the cost, both the written and unwritten costs of NATO, and then what are the long-term implications or consequences of NATO? So that's going to be the gist of this podcast. Jeremy, did I do a good enough job of summarizing what we're going to kind of address here tonight?
Yeah, and I think that the one other thing too, and it kind of goes, so it kind of goes into kind of the stockpile thing, but I think one of the other points that we were going to try and cover too is NATO today realistically, and I'm saying realistically as in like no BS, like if something were to happen, are the countries in NATO realistically militarily capable of dealing with somebody like Russia or China? And I set this as a stage for people to have conversations, because I want conversations to happen. We need to have real conversations, but we also need to be honest with ourselves. And I think that's what we're going to try and do today. Correct.
Yeah. And then the other point, and it'll just weave its way in there, which is, and so Jeremy and I both come from this aspect, Jeremy maybe a little bit more so, maybe a little bit more knowledgeable on, but let's just look at it from the selfish xenophobic perspective of, we're Americans, right? Now, whoever's watching this, you might be from another country, but you should have your same, selfish concerns. Like, what does your country think?
At least a sense of nationalism.
Yeah. Like, hey, is this something we really should be involved in? And that's the big question, right? Because
100%.
Again,
it's not just an American issue.
No, it's not at all. I mean, well, if you're from a country that's a NATO signatory, it's a question you should be asking yourself
100%.
Equally so, right? And that's the 600-pound gorilla in the room. Is like, wow, are we really part of something? And like, are we really going to go to war over Ukraine? So jumping ahead there a little bit, but you can see that is going to be the focal point, or that's at least the stepping stone for our argument or our conversation here tonight. Is because right here, right now, because unless you're an old, Cold War warrior like me, I mean, NATO was a real thing. And I'm going to stop right there because I'm jumping ahead, because I am going to bring this up. I mean, I was in the military during the height of the Cold War. This was real back then. Now, for younger generations, you might not remember that stuff from the late 70s, early 80s. I do. I lived it, right? I was in the military during that time. But you're of the age now where you're looking at Ukraine, and you might be asking yourself, like, wow, if we go to war, America goes to war with Russia over Ukraine, and I'm of a military age male, hang on, time out. I'm not sure I'm really thinking that's what I want to give my life for. So,
right.
Hey, and one last thing, Jeremy, before we go any further, because we're almost at 10 minutes. And it's so that's a pretty good intro. But the thing we forgot to do, boys and girls, is we're your hosts. We said Mark and Jeremy. If you don't know who we are, go back and see previous videos. But just the real down and dirty. I'm Mark. I own a small business right now, Centerline Systems. That's what I do for, like, to put eggs in my refrigerator. And prior to that, and it's I put my pants on just like anyone else. But prior to that, if you're interested, I already kind of mentioned I was in the military for a little over 20 years. That's both active duty, Army Reserve, and National Guard. I have my military career encompassed all three. And then before I started this business, the last cool guy thing I did is I was in the CIA as an operations officer for Ground Branch. That's it. That's my background. Jeremy, quick little snapshot of who you are for everybody, sir.
Yeah. So for those of you who have been here before, you kind of already know the spiel, but so my name is Jeremy, or Redbeard, whichever. But I graduated school for gunsmithing. I'm a certified gunsmith. I'm a fitness junkie. I'm a dirty civilian that likes to train with firearms and do a lot of cool guy stuff, which I'm very fortunate to know people in that realm to be able to do that with and better myself as a person. And I am also a constitutional scholar and student. So I kind of look at things from the purview or through the lens of that and whether or not it kind of passes the sniff test. So with that's basically all I got. Again, like Mark said, we do kind of an extended format on that. I believe in the first video, we did a really good job of elaborating who we were. So if you want, go back to that intro and you can get a little bit more about our background. So.
Yep. And then again, boys and girls, you also, have heard in the last couple of videos, we're working this out. This isn't our job. This isn't what we're trying to do for a job. But we are trying to get this format down a little better. Yeah. So the last thing, Jeremy and I apologize, I didn't say this to you in our warm up here is, hey, two little pieces of housekeeping. First and foremost, we've already done one giveaway. Now, honestly, I haven't had a chance to even go back, Jeremy, and look at that video to see what kind of comments were made or if anybody answered. I did have one person send me an email. I asked them to go to the video itself and leave the comments there. So everybody just bear with me. But yeah, I'm going to give a free piece of gear away. I haven't had a chance to even look at the comments because life is life and we're all freaking busy and you're burning the candle at both ends. But we'll get to that. So that's one thing. Just stay tuned. So we're trying to have fun with these podcasts. And Jeremy is
informative.
Yeah, but Jeremy's going to be the master of questions, so to speak. And so we don't potentially 8 podcasts in a month, give or take 6 to 8, something like that. So 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4, we're already reaching out to other companies, other small businesses, other individuals that have great products, a great attitude, and we will have some free gear to give away on a irregular basis. So you're gonna and it's never going to be in the same spot in the video. And Jeremy's questions. So if you don't know what we're talking about, go see the episode 1. But and then Jeremy's questions will always be, we know everybody's going to cheat and you're going to use the internet, and that's fine. So, but the point is, we want you to either know it or go do the research. But then the winner is, and it's totally subjective. It's based on what we like, but then you're going to have to add something else to it. Give us a little bit more of
some flavor, some spice.
Add some flavor to it. Yep. So that's one piece of housekeeping. And then the second piece of housekeeping is, I just want to give a huge shout out to Paul. Paul's an individual. So another little piece of background. So we post a lot. I was posting a lot more of Centerline Systems, the more detailed or nuanced videos, not just the gear videos, over on Black Scout Survival's Discord. I was posting them over there, a couple weeks before I put them up on my YouTube channel. We're already kind of doing that. Episode 2 was posted over on Discord before it was live on YouTube. And as a result of that, an individual named Paul, and this is what Black Scout Survival is working towards, trying to create a community. And I think the reason I'm bringing this up is housekeeping, and Jeremy can add his comments here as well, but it is a community, right? I may never meet you. I may never share a beer with you, but if you are in this world and you want to have a conversation and you want to use this thing between your shoulder blades to actually utilize it, all right, and not to be just another pretty face with an awesome beard. But if you want to use that, right? Yeah. No, I mean, that's the whole point. So this guy named Paul, I won't say his last name for privacy issues, but he has reached out and sent a camera in. I've got a second camera I was going to loan to Jeremy, but Paul did it, and we just haven't had a chance to get it set up today. But so Jeremy, for me and you, I think, here, let me get that up there. Paul, here's to you, sir. Much appreciated. You are an awesome man, Charlie Brown. Thank you much.
Absolutely appreciated. Really, really appreciated. So
do you have anything?
And it's really cool that we have people like that like get involved, because it's it's help us, help you, help us, you know. So it kind of circles back. Not to steal the words of the White House individual, but who though
You just
they
had to get a
shall not be
JP. You
named.
just had to get a JP dig in there, didn't you?
Yeah. Well,
Oh,
this
we're gonna circle back
back.
around. Yeah, there you go.
Anyways,
I love it.
so
All right. So there we go. We're at 15 minutes right now,
Yep.
Jeremy. So this is going to go just a tad over an hour because
Yep.
we'll get better. We won't have to do as much in the future on the intro. And to Paul's credit, Paul also said I do too much on the outros too. I'm not even going to share the joke he shared in his email, but it was pretty fucking funny. But yeah, so let's get this back on track. We're gonna go a little bit long. We're trying to do this as an hour, boys and girls, but we did just kind of eat up about 10 minutes of not unnecessary, but so let's jump into it. So we're going to talk about NATO. I'm going to give you this isn't a class on history. You can do your own research. I'm going to talk a little bit about NATO and why I think, from my understanding of history and my not just understanding, but my living it during that period of time, I'm going to give you just a quick little intro, which is going to then end with my argument of, which is going to be a question for you. And then I think we're going to then come over to Jeremy, and then Jeremy's going to expound upon that and add a lot of his flavor to it from that whole constitutional. And then I think that will come into that whole final military question, that's probably where we'll end it tonight. So we already said what NATO stands for, North American Treaty Organization.
Yep.
Off the top of my head, you're basically looking at the end of World War II, and as the Cold War just was kind of getting, going, right? So, just about the time of the Korean War, the late 40s, I think like 48, 49. Again, I don't know the exact date, but I know it's somewhere right around there. But the expressed intent of NATO was to have European, North American, or North Atlantic, excuse me. If I said North American Treaty, I apologize. It's North Atlantic Treaty Organization. But North Atlantic, quote unquote, Western countries, the fear of the Soviet Union at that time and the expansion of communism was so great. And quite honestly, kind of real. If you go back and look at the history of what the Russians were doing, they were solidifying their power as well. They were putting down cues. I mean, look at Hungary. It was Czechoslovakia back then, not the Czech
Yugoslavia.
Exactly. So both sides were realizing like, hey, we're in a major struggle for potentially the future of the planet, right? And who's going to control it and who's going to shape its, its future destiny and how we did business, the economic system, the political system. I mean, this was a real struggle. I mean, if you were alive during that period of time, a younger person right now, who's maybe in their 20s and 30s at this present day and age at 2023, well, it really has no idea what the hell we're talking about because you didn't live and grow up under this umbrella. So my historical
cover times.
What's that?
Not in the duck and cover times.
Nope, exactly. And so,
which who even knows about that? Like, I know about it, but who in my age category or younger,
Well, and it also applies to like terrorism. Like, so, terrorism, and I think maybe terrorism, it was of interest to me and why I went on to study it is because, my second duty posting was in Germany. It was at Baumholder in Germany, and terrorism was real. There were like, Red Army faction, Baader Meinhof gang, like there was nightclub bombings. There was like, assassinations. There was raids on ammo supply points. I mean, it was actually a legitimate thing back there. And these were, politically motivated, communist, socialist type of, terrorist
like the Weather Underground.
Well, that's a little bit different, but actually that's a great one. Yeah. But actually, I'd love to just do a podcast on the Weather Underground because
fascinating stuff.
Well, and Ayers is out there right now and was advising, a president. So, but we digress. But that's a great point, Jeremy.
I had to throw it in. So.
Yeah, thanks for messing with my mojo here. I was trying to keep us on point. Now you're out like Jeremy just did the squirrel to me. I'm like, ooh. But all I'm trying to say is there was a time, and I'm not trying to steal Jeremy's thunder on the constitutional perspective here of whether we should or should not be ever signatories to any type of alliance or treaty. I mean, that is something we're going to talk about. But I'm just going to say, whether you agree with it from that constitutional perspective or disagree, that there was an era in the history of humanity, in the history of the United States, in the history of Europe, where this was a very real threat. This was something that everybody was very seriously concerned about. I remember going to Fulda Gap on a recon and just
I was waiting for you to bring that up.
Yeah, and just looking there and saying, yeah, this is where I'm going to die. Like this is where my bones will be interned for the history of humanity.
I've heard
there is
several
a
people bring that up too.
Yeah. So NATO, you could make an argument, and I'm willing to, let's just concede this fact. You could make an argument that NATO was a necessary evil. It was something we had to do during that era. That era, though, ended with the fall of the wall in the 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be my argument. So just so you know, you could disagree with me, but I'm just letting you know my point of intersection. So NATO was created to combat an expansionist Soviet Union. If we take as a way of a point intersection, a way of argument, that then therefore the moment the Soviet Union ceased to exist, then you have begs the question, well, then why does NATO continue to exist? And then the final thing I'm going to say before I throw it over to Jeremy is, history repeats itself, unfortunately, because people are stupid and we don't study history. Mm-hmm. If you look at the history of Russia and everything that they've gone through as a people, and I'm not just talking World War II with Germany. It's also World War I, the Napoleonic era, the SARS, the revolution. They are people who, I don't know how to say it, but like, Jeremy, I don't know, do they have itchy trigger fingers? Like, you don't want to be anywhere around their muzzle because you never know when they're just going to and then pull the trigger and freak out because they've been attacked so many times that their cultural psyche is they perceive everything as like, this could be the next burning of Moscow, by Napoleon or, Hitler,
well, and I think
one last thing. I'm just trying to say, like, World War II, the Russians lost millions of men. Like our losses pale in comparison to what the Russians did. And I'm not going to get in debate about whether that's because of military hardware and tactics, which that does play a lot into it. But all I'm trying to say is that psyche, that was part of the Russian psyche. And so the moment the wall comes down, my question I'm positing before I turn over to Jeremy is then, so why did NATO exist after that? Why did we maintain our why did NATO even just why did we insist upon promoting, continuing, and then promoting, and look where we are now, where we are expanding NATO. We're doing that when the reason for NATO, this is my argument, the reason for NATO's existence is over. We won. The wall came down. The Soviet Union broke up and it was Russia and a bunch of satellite countries. Why would we expand NATO towards Russia, as opposed to, I hate to use a Star Trek reference, but like have a neutral zone. So here's these the former satellite states, countries of the former Soviet Union. Now it's Russia, and they are independent countries. My argument would be from a military historical perspective, and Jeremy, this is where I'm going to turn it over to you, from both military and the constitutional side. Why would we take measures that would be perceived as encroachment or advancement or threats because we're dealing with a bunch of people who've been invaded multiple times? We as Americans have the luxury of not really knowing that except for 1812. So there, on that note, Jeremy, I just rambled for a good period of time. Why don't you take it?
To that point, and I want to kind of go off of what you said, and then I'll expound on a couple other points I have. But what a lot of people tend to forget, and when the Ukraine, well, I shouldn't say when the Ukraine war kicked off. What I want people to understand is this is something that has been going on for literally for literally a long time, decades, I would argue. But I mean, because you're talking about a whole other type of people that we as Americans will never even be able to identify with, and it's not really our place to tell Slavs how to deal with Slavic problems. And I respect the people of both Ukraine and Russia because they're a hardy, robust people. But their problems are also not
their problems.
But
here's their problems are their problems.
Yeah. And so that being said, though, so when you talked about the dissolution of the Berlin Wall, the taking of it down and all of that, there was, I don't know how many people realize this, but it was something that was that, after, when Russia went full bore into Ukraine, a lot of people had mentioned, part of the reason for this and part of the reason that this did occur is because back when was it, 90 or 91, Mark, do you remember? There's an agreement signed that NATO would not go beyond I believe it was Germany, and NATO was not.
I don't know if it was. I don't know if it was limited to Germany, but it was, and I think it was 91. It's
I
part and
believe it
parcel
was
with the
91.
wall. Yeah, I think it was 91. But you're absolutely right. Even if you and I are getting it slightly wrong, you're still absolutely right. We actually said no moth. We're good to go, right?
Yep. And so this was something that, and to get to another point that you brought up, like the Russians will take you at your word. And the reason everybody perceives them as being so aggressive is because, and pardon my French, people like to fuck over Russians and then act like victims when Russians are like, nope, this isn't the way it's going to happen. And they call you on your bullshit. And NATO did a class act on that to where they're like, look, we're not going to expand beyond this point. This is the agreement that we're going to set. And on the onset of people bringing this up, you had all of your state media talking heads that were like, well, like it was kind of a faux agreement. Like it wasn't, I believe it was the German prime minister who admitted like, no, but we never took this seriously. But it's like, the point is the Russians did.
The Russians did.
Yep. They literally, that was a gesture of goodwill. And you went out of your way to destroy that goodwill. And then you wonder why the Russians are aggravated with NATO, because this was supposed to be an important moment. And then,
well, hey, before you go any further, I just want to, I like where you're going.
Go ahead.
But I just want to clarify, because I know right now there is somebody who's saying, oh, Mark and Jeremy are just shills for RS or like, no, that has nothing to do with it at all. We're not saying Russia's innocent. We're just basically trying to be human beings, and laying out the both humanistic and historic facts of why some of these things are taking place, or why we are where we are now.
So a good example of this, a neighbor dispute. I actually worked landscaping during a neighbor dispute. And the reason I bring this up is if you have a neighbor that's like, hey, no, this is all good. We're not gonna claim any more of your land. This is what it is. And then all of a sudden, the person you go to work for, in my instance, it was sod and drain tile. We started putting this in, and the neighbor's just like, nope, you can't do it because, this is our property, and they want to start redrawing the lines. And the neighbor's like, whoa, like we agreed. We had a surveyor come out. We agreed that this is what this was. And now you're disputing this. It's literally a neighbor dispute, except with nations. And the problem with that is these nations
and nuclear weapons.
Well, that's just it. The problem is you have nations that are now developed with world-ending firepower, right? And it's like, that's very problematic because of the fact that, again, you have what was supposed to be a very well understood agreement, and then you have NATO that just is, again, by the admission of, I believe it was one of the German PMs, and this was literally a couple months ago. They're like, the gal, I don't remember the lady's name, but she was like, no, yeah, like this was literally just to like buy us some time in order to, to not have to deal with Russia as we continue doing this. And it's like, dude, like, how is that not problematic? Like, how is that not a problem? And so we have this situation to where NATO cannot be trusted, right? Is that safe to say, Mark?
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, see again, but it's going to be a matter of perspective. And somebody who's like 100% drinking the Kool-Aid will say, well, no, we're always right. Whereas like, I totally understand what you're saying. I'm like, yeah, if I was Russia or any, or even any of the, of the former Soviet, satellite states, I'd be looking at us like, yeah, these guys lie all the time, you know?
And, so we have that portion of this dynamic at play to where now you have a situation to where NATO can't be trusted. And what's amazing to me is Russia many times had still come to the table. And that's not to say that Russia hasn't done their own thing too, but at the same time, it's whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, they are also, you kind of can't blame them for just kind of going off and doing their own thing, because they're only emulating what was done to them. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong, but you have to understand it from the perspective of, if there's no trust. But Russia has come to the table several times. They've tried to make agreements. They've tried to put out a number of different things, even well before they went full bore into Ukraine. And they've tried to make concessions, agreements, all of that. And every single time it's been NATO's had this hard line of like, no, we're not going to do this. We're refusing to compromise, better dead than red, essentially. And I feel like that's still the mentality of NATO today. Like you literally, in some people might not like this, but we literally have dinosaurs dictating policy in NATO that are so stuck into the Red Scare idea that they are, I would say that they're obsessed with the prospect of a confrontation with Russia, which is equitably dangerous, if not more dangerous than before.
Hey, just a real quick aside. So when I brought you to single screen, boys and girls, do your own research. I mean, to Jeremy's point, I just thought, I just went over, and I don't use Google. All right. I use a different search engine. But I just went over and I just pulled up what Jeremy was saying. I was hoping I could find the exact reference. And here's the deal. You'll still see me, but I won't see you guys for a second. And I'm not sharing this, but just my search. And this is over on Brave Search. Like all the top articles, and I'd have to read 8 to 10 articles just to see if this is what Jeremy's talking about. But if it isn't, it's all examples of exactly what Jeremy's talking about, where the admission or being busted on a hot mic, or that kind of stuff. So I just looked at them and I just scrolled through, and it's like there was at least 10 articles there, Jeremy. Yeah. So it's not even. So I think that
it's not just conjecture.
Yeah, no, I think that further proves your point. Like this person said this one thing. I was looking for that one thing. And what I just found was 10 other, again, just really preliminary, just cursory search, 10 other things of admissions or the desire to expand this war and to your point. So sorry. I just wanted to throw that in there because I was just doing a little research while you were talking.
Right. And, again, like all of this, it's amazing, everybody. Like we're in 2023. You can literally go and research and do all this stuff. And as long as you're researching with a realm of earnesty, if you will, like if you're being honest.
Well, and honestly, seriously, Jeremy, and to that point, our last video, censorship. Like, so again, I'm using Brave Search. I'm sorry, but this just was too good to pass up. If I would have been searching on Wikipedia, what do you think I would have found? If I would have searched this on Google, what would I have found? Right. I don't know, DuckDuckGo, is it compromised? But so even this right here still ties into our previous conversation. Sorry, because you just said if you're being earnest and honest, well, okay, but if you're being honest and you're only relying on MSNBC, well, you're not going to get all the facts. And I'm not saying that Brave Search is a million times better, but I don't think I would have seen these articles over on Google. Matter of fact, while you're talking, I'll do this on Google while you're talking.
Well, and so my point to this, I'm going to pivot back to what I was trying to kind of elaborate or expound upon in regard to NATO. But the reality of it is like people, if you want to research something, you have to be in for the long haul and expect that if you find 10 articles, that you need to examine the reality that like 7 of those 10 articles are probably going to be extremely biased. And there's probably not going to be a realm of neutrality or reporting or journalism in which you can develop your own opinion. That being said, I would still encourage people to even read the bias articles, because there's in order to provide valid misinformation, disinformation, or a lie, you have to have some levity of truth. So even in biased articles, there is some element of truth in there. So you still have to do your due diligence of those 10 articles that you pick. So now I'm going to kind of pivot back here, going outside of the realm of the agreements and the idea that this whole thing was just, more or less kind of a ruse to kind of quell the Russian bear. And mind you, when the Soviet Union disbanded, like Russia really was in ruins. They really were. Like they kind of they hit some pretty hard times, and they didn't really know where to go. And some could say that leading up through the 80s, even into the Chernobyl incident, that they had already had numerous issues that affected their ability to be a strong entity in the world. So in the end of the day, like, you're also looking at a country that was already like on its downturn, not really being able to hold all these things together. But now we need to look at going forward here. We look at the behavior of NATO, and I feel like it might be mildly bold to say, but is NATO not emulating today what the Soviet Union was back then? And the extent, and if you look at its state, is NATO not reflecting the broken down antiquated preparedness of how the Soviets were? Because if
Or
you
antiquated
anybody,
ideas or model.
yeah,
It isn't
100%.
necessarily the preparedness. Let's keep that to the military side, but
Yep.
it is the model. Is
Yeah.
is that modern, outdated, or
Right.
still somewhat
Yeah.
salient? You know,
And I would argue the fact that it's lost back in the 50s and 60s, if we're being completely honest. I would say that
NATO.
there's, again, you have these dinosaurs that have been around forever. I don't know how they're still around. They must have some type of superhuman serum that we
They
don't
made a
know
pact
about.
with Satan.
Yeah, well, yeah, that too.
I don't have my
And
tinfoil hat, but
but the thing of it is when you realistically look at it, and I kind of want to shift over into the military evaluation of things too, which I'll send it over to you in a second here, Mark. But when you look at this broken system, you look at how antiquated it is, you look at how people are behaving with NATO, and then you look at the overall like degradation. And I say degradation because if you look at how NATO is in the last year, in Britain, in places like Italy, in places like Germany, and a number of NATO countries, we have seen, and even in the United States, we have seen protests to get those countries out of NATO. People
yeah,
don't want to be involved in it because they're losing resources, they're losing their military capability, which there was something that came out of both Britain and Germany, I think about a month ago, to where the heads of defense for those two countries literally said our militaries are impotent and basically inoperable. And if something was to come to the door right now, we would have no viable way of being able to fend off an attack.
well,
So I'm going to
in all fairness, no, I want
yeah,
to come back to you and let you finish. But
yeah,
in all fairness, they did make those statements. But I want to, like, in context,
yeah,
they were talking about, again, to your point, degradation.
mhm,
They had expanded all of their reserves, and
right,
like, so it's
yep,
not like they didn't have the will, or like they don't have
no,
properly
no,
trained
absolutely not.
soldiers. Yeah, I just
Yep,
wanted, like, Jeremy isn't saying that.
mhm,
Well, I mean, that could be a separate
yeah,
conversation, but it really boiled down to, again, the resources, and the
yeah,
military is dependent upon resources, just like you and I are dependent upon
yeah,
resources. The resources and the resource chain or flow, the stream, just comes from different locations. You and I
right,
are like, again, I got the damn deer in the yard now, and that's why I'm like squirrel. You know, like, well, those are resources to me. That's
mhm,
food, that's clothing, that's shelter, that's all that. If
yep,
there's no deer, I have no resources. If you're the military and your job is, war fighting, and you've got no tanks, no
yep,
ammo, no logistical
yeah,
infrastructure, well, then you don't have the resources. I
right.
think that's the point you were making, correct?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and I think that a lot of that also affects the operational preparedness of the militaries in
Yep.
general.
Damn right.
And if you go back and you look at these dialogues, and you can look at there's several articles with the head of the military, one of the primary heads of the military for Britain, and then um, um, for
Germany
Germany,
said it as well,
and
and
yep,
also on our side too, and here in
and
America, they're
yep,
saying.
and the United States. But I point out both Britain and Germany in particular, because both of them had admitted that they're outside of like their special operations forces. A lot of their conventional forces were under-equipped, under-trained, and they really, and it was only within like the last 10 years. We're not talking about a general operational preparedness, but the last 10 years, they saw a significant hit to their forces' operational capability. And now you have the war in Ukraine, to where NATO's like, you need to send all of this gear, you need to do this, you need to do that. It's like, okay, well, so you have, and this kind of circles back to the point of you have an entity that's supporting a country that's not in NATO, demanding of these NATO countries, which are already suffering issues at an operational capability level in their own countries. And now you're basically neutering these countries, and these countries are like, look, like we could not fight off an attack at this juncture if we tried. And for the United States on that portion, I think it was a couple months ago, or maybe it was a month ago, when there was a artillery detachment that were like, dude, we can't even train because all of our arty got sent over to Ukraine. And it's like, so this is one of the problems with an entangling alliance. And we're going to shift over to the military aspect because there's a lot more to expound upon. But the entangling alliance, it was something that was
Time out, if you don't mind. No, save that commentary where you're going.
Okay.
No, let's just actually.
Yeah.
And we're training to standards, not to time, but we are at 40 minutes. Let me just quickly respond on the military side of things and give you a chance. And then let's go over to the entanglements, because I think we should spend at least, you need to talk for at least 10 minutes on the entanglements side. So, but to your point, I just want to add a little flavor. So look, SecDef just came out. So Secretary of Defense, Austin, well, maybe it wasn't Austin, but it was Secretary of Defense. It was his office. And like, and I, boys and girls, again, do your own research. You know, I'm just a guy, put my pants on like everybody else, but I follow this stuff on near daily basis. But I also have a life, and I'm working like 12 to 16-hour days. And like, you know, so, but it was just within this last week, there was a comment out of the Defense Department, and whether it was by Austin or not, it's kind of irrelevant, but we're already reaching into our Middle Eastern stockpiles. So to Jeremy's point, we aren't even capable. Now, Jeremy's talking about, you know, U.S. military elements not even having the resources is able to do training to maintain their proficiency in warfighting, right? That is their goal, is to be proficient at warfighting. Like, I'm supposed to be proficient at making outdoor gear. You know, Jeremy's supposed to be proficient at growing a beard. He's failing, but you know, whatever.
Stockpile's a little low, Mark. Sorry.
But a little funny, you know, trying to have a little humor, because this is a very serious comment. You know, the Western, if you want to say Western, you know, our allies, and this also flows, I'm sure, down into our Asian allies, you know, from the Asian theater of operation, or the African, even, you know, wherever. People are really, it's a really tough time in history, and we're going to give all of our limited resources away to fight a war for somebody who's not even part of NATO. And again, going back into the history of it, see, I did all of you a disservice. Well, there's no way we can do this in an hour, so I don't know if it's a disservice. Go do your own research. Look at, and Jeremy, I'm bringing it back all the way to something we talked about before. So when I pulled this up on Google, like 7 out of 10 articles, I'm just going to do the first snapshot, were all articles about Gorbachev saying, oh no, we never thought it meant that that NATO was not going to expand. See what I'm getting at? So again, even look at going back to censorship and shaping the conversation. I just went over to Google. There wasn't a single thing about people coming out and saying stuff where this is a bad idea. It was all about Gorbachev. And you know, I have to go and look at, you know, did Gorbachev say, well, we were unclear, whatever, but that's all it was. It's painting an image that, oh, no, because people like Jeremy and I are starting to raise this question for people like you who are watching this podcast or thinking about this. So the censorship network, you know, and machine is getting involved because they don't want you to hear that. Oh no, we may have kind of like, you know, violated some things, and why is there this treaty? And oh no, Russia didn't care that if we expanded NATO up to their doorstep. I mean, again, does that make sense? If Jeremy has had people break into his house once a week, and it's always from the neighbor or, you know, whoever moves into the house in the lot next door. And if Jeremy decides to build a fence on the dividing line between his property line and the house next door, and then people from the house next door say Jeremy's a bigot or this or that or whatever the thing is, Jeremy might be an asshole, but Jeremy's got a legitimate beef. Hey, whoever lives there for whatever reason, you know, 8 out of 10 times, you know, 4 out of 5 times, whoever lives there tries to come over to my house and, you know, break into my garage and steal stuff from me or kill my wife or something. Again, these are bad anecdotes, but you see the point I'm trying to make. And then Jeremy, kind of going into your other thing about, you know, again, the readiness side of it. And I think
Mhm.
that's something that, we just won't be able to do justice to
Right.
it. Limited resources. Here's the military. And you did a great job of that, is like, hey, boys and girls, how can we fight any other conflict? So see, we're not even talking about China. We're not talking
Yep.
about other obligations, whether that's in Africa, the Middle East, along our southern and northern border. I mean, like, there's so many other things that we're supposed to be able to do. And we're
Yeah.
squandering resources over here for what reason? And I think that
Right.
was the point that that was my
Yeah.
takeaway on that. So I just had to throw that in there before,
Yeah.
because I think that, so I want to give you a chance to finish the military and the
Mhm.
obligation and what does this do to our readiness? And if you're a German, here's my last point.
Yeah.
And if you look at NATO, well, who's actually paying for NATO? I mean,
Mhm.
seriously, this information's out there. Go and take a look. Germany's, it's like everybody's relying on us. It was, again, it almost
100%.
seems like this was a big scam. Like the
Yep.
American taxpayers pay for the enrichment of everybody else, and no one else has
Yep.
to make any type of, obligation or fulfill any obligation, or,
Yep.
well, okay, Jeremy pays $100, and if I have the money, I'll pay $1 today.
Mhm.
Well, but Jeremy's like, he's a millionaire. And that seems to be the answer, or
Yep.
well, we're just not as rich as you as a country. Yeah, but you're the ones who, if it happens, it's going to be on your doorstep
Right.
before it's on mine.
Mhm.
You got to be just as equally committed to this, percentage
Right.
wise. Yeah, maybe you only give $1 and I give 100, but if 100 represents 10% of my budget, that dollar better represent 10% of your budget as well. And
Yep.
that's not the case, boys and girls.
Mhm.
So that was
Yeah.
my thing based on what you just said, military. So
Right.
why
Well,
don't
and
you respond to that, and then maybe segue that, like you were trying
Yeah.
to do, into the entanglement side, if you would, please.
yeah, and actually, I'll be able to do that pretty easily. So when we're looking at stockpiles, military readiness, and stuff like that, we have to, again, kind of consider, one, is anybody here realistically, and I ask this in all seriousness, or anybody at a governmental level in any of these organizations, whether it's the U.S. government, the German government, the British government, or NATO in general, has it realistically occurred to people that this is not the Middle East? This is not Africa. This is uh, a war that is occurring with both conventional and unconventional means being used. And you have guys that are going over and volunteering over in Ukraine. And there's several interviews out there to where guys are like, dude, like, I did time over in the Middle East, but I've never been shot at by a tank before. And like, and it's like, and they're like, yeah, it's
That's a damn
fucking
good point.
crazy. Like, I've never had a bomb dropped on me or by my position by returning artillery fire, or fighter aircraft or bomber aircraft or whatever the case that, like, and it's not to diminish anybody's service or going over there, but the reality of it is has it occurred to anybody in NATO that this type of war, more than likely, due to the fact that NATO has spent so much time putting people over in the Middle East, that they have simply forgotten how this type of war is to be played, in that it really comes down to a war of attrition, in that you're squaring up to face a foe who during World War II knew more about the war of attrition than any other country that played a role in it. That they literally rose like a 10 million man army or more in no time at all. And they're like, you will go to the front, you will defend your motherland, and this is what is expected of you. Right, wrong, or indifferent, regardless of how you evaluate their policies, they mustered one of the largest rapidly deployed armies in the world in very little time. And they were wildly successful, because if you look at their manufacturing capabilities, it made what we did in World War II look like child's play. They cranked out, we did a lot of really good things, but if you look at and that's not saying that all their shit worked either. Like, let's not argue about that.
All right, yeah, I was just gonna say, you need,
But
you got to throw some caveats in there.
No, and that's the thing.
I mean,
is,
they
like,
really seriously did pick up
Yeah.
their whole industrial complex and move it
Yeah.
east of the Ural Mountains. I mean, so
100%. And dude, it is freaking amazing what war, like, historically, what a wartime Russia, even if you want to go all the way back to like the 11s or like even the 1000 AD Russia, when you had even the Vikings that went into Russia, which encountered the Rus people. Like,
Yeah.
dude, these people are squared away when it comes to like defending their homeland, right?
Yeah.
Like, these are the type of people that they can and will mobilize, and they will do it effectively, or at least as effectively as they can. So it's like, does NATO even take any of that into account? Because if you're not, you've already lost a war that you're trying to get everybody involved in, and you don't even know it yet because you're omitting the idea, you're omitting reality at that point. And to me, let's segue into this idea.
Well, hey,
Isn't
before you
Yeah.
segue, let me just ask you a
Yeah.
question. The one thing about, and I really don't go out of my
Yep.
way to watch any,
Yep.
the video and the commentary about what's going on in
Mhm.
Ukraine. And I hate to say this, boys and girls, but I've spent over 30 years of my life in the service of this country. 20 years in the military, well, a little over 20 years in the military, a little under 10 years in the agency. Any one of those things could have resulted in my death, both in terms of training accidents or direct action, all that time. And this isn't a pat. I'm not saying a look at me. I'm just
No.
trying to give you some context to go into what Jeremy's talking about. Like, I volunteered for this, and even the training events, like, so the things that didn't kill you, there were still all these other sacrifices that you go on, like never getting a second date because you're never an American, blah, 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 blah,
Mhm.
blah, or woe is me, right? I raised my hand to do that. And that's why I'm kind of going with this.
Yeah.
That's kind of the difference of our style of warfare versus the Russians, as Jeremy just gave you just like an incredibly small snapshot of the history. But that ties in, and that's why I'm going to bring it up to you, Jeremy. That ties into what I was saying at the beginning. Is like, if we don't know this, if we don't study this history, if we don't take a look at this from an objective, realistic perspective, we'll never understand the adversary that we're dealing with, right? And so you've just kind of tied in what I said near the beginning into what you're saying now. And I think that's very salient, and it's something that we have to, really take a look back. Look, I just saw some stupid video, and this is kind of an aside, but I'll just throw this out there and turn it back over to you. I just saw some video the other day it popped up on, as I was doing some YouTube-y shit. It popped up on my feed. Of course, the people I follow don't pop up on my feed, but something else did. And it's basic. Yeah, exactly. And it's basic training. And it's soldiers in basic training. They're not even soldiers yet. They're recruits. And they're on their cell phones. And it's, so here, imagine like, so there's formations where you're looking at you're looking at a front of maybe, depending on the type of element, maybe 10 people across the front, 4 rows deep, 10 per row. But this is a file. So you're looking at, 3 people as the front, and it's a like 10 people long file. I'm saying this for people maybe who weren't in the military. It tells you what's going on, right? Because these files are for, imagine like, we've got to have a bunch of people, stand here, and then we're going to have the next 10 people go through a door for some medical procedure or paperwork or something like that. That's how the military works. So here's these, I'm assuming at least 2 files, maybe 3, and all these kids are on their cell phones. And then over in the quad is a soldier, a recruit, arguing with a drill instructor. I mean, like just not zero F's to give. And here, and one of the kids is filming it on his phone. And as he's filming this event, which is like, maybe 20 yards over here, in the foreground are all these other kids on their freaking cell phones. Like, what in the fuck? So to your point, I mean, you see where I'm going with this, Jeremy? It's like, this 100%. Is what we've become, right? So if that's who we are, how does this conversation even resonate with people anymore? Like, because apparently our war fighters think it's more important to argue with drill sergeants and be on their TikTok accounts.
Well, and I think that
somebody in the chain of command thinks that's okay.
Right. Well, and I think that's also where you start to see this exodus.
And I'm sorry, just one last thing. And that ties in, I'm sorry, last thing is to, that historically, as a culture, we don't have a very long historical perspective or horizon. The Russians do, the Chinese do. It's the same both backwards and forwards. They play a long game. We're very self-centered. So the last thing, and I realized this is what kind of made me want to say this, Jeremy's comment.
Camera.
What's that?
The cameras went out for you and me for a minute. So
I'm back. I'm moving anyway. No, you're back. There you go. Yeah, we're getting messed with it. But something that you said, and I think that's what originally caused me to have this reaction, is the Russians still know the history. Yeah, they know that. They know and this is what is bred into them. We
Yeah.
don't even remember what happened back at September 11th. September 11th doesn't even resonate anymore in
And
the
that's,
American culture, the American
yeah.
psyche. You know, so all right, Jeremy,
Well,
continue.
and to kind of wrap up that point too, and then I'll do my shift here. But you also have a people to where, and I can't even, you know, people might disagree with me on this. You can't even include Ukrainians in this. And it's not a slight against Ukrainian people, because I don't believe that every single person in Ukraine is agreeable with their government, much like we are not agreeable with our government, to many factors and degrees. But last time I checked, it wasn't Russia that was trying to eliminate their, it wasn't Russia that was trying to, at this juncture, and I'm talking today, I'm not talking 50 years ago. It's not Russia that's trying to absolutely eliminate and sterilize their culture as a people and their history as a people, because what they've started to realize is, look, we need to learn from this shit. We need to learn from this and move forward. And all of our adversity as a people is what hardens us as a people. It's what brings us together as a people. Whether people want to see it or not, they definitely have a very nationalistic edge, which is something that we don't have as Americans anymore. We don't have that in America anymore, to where, like, it's not enough to wave a Star-Spangled Banner and say you support the military. We literally have a culture of people to where, well, I don't think it's overwhelmingly most people, but I think that there's a large enough swath of people in this country that not only do not know our history as a country, but they seek to eliminate it. And they don't, and I don't even think that they know why, other than the fact that they're told that that's the right thing to do by people that are supposedly intellectuals. You know, we said the Russians had this happen in their own country. This is what communism is, right? Like, you need to eliminate your history in order to create this new thing. And now you have Russians that are like, hey, like, we are not going to rename our streets to make you feel better or make the world feel better. Fuck you. We don't care what the world thinks. These are people, good, bad, or indifferent, that were a part of our history. And if we forget our history, we forget who we are as a people. Unfortunately, you know, and it does tie into the idea too, like, you're facing a country, or we have the potential to face a country. And I would say, to a certain degree, we are by proxy fighting Russia, albeit I would say more or less indirectly at this juncture, but, you know, it could always get a little more exciting in the kitchen. But
Hey, I gotta slow down. Don't take us
yeah,
into the potential, the conflict. Because what you said was so poignant. That was like a punch to my stomach, a kick in the nuts. You're absolutely right. As a culturally speaking, we're behind the eight ball. Like, everything you just said is like, hey, that culture, they still, like, you know, whether you like it or not. Again, we're not being apologists. We're not defending their perspective, but that doesn't take away from Jeremy's point. Take a look around you. Does anybody even, how many people even know the Bill of Rights? You know, or like, Jeremy, seriously, is are social studies even taught anymore? Like, is American history, like, and what does that even look like in schools? To your point, it's like, oh yeah, Lewis and Clark were evil men. Like, that's what we're teaching, you know? So yeah, I mean, and it's not that.
if
So
they are,
somebody
why?
right now might say, well, you know, you guys are talking about teaching false history.
Yeah.
You know, and look, I'm not concerned about quote unquote false history. In today's day and age, that's almost impossible to do, right? There's just the internet, right? It's there.
Yeah.
What I'm concerned about is false patriotism, or destroying patriotism. I mean, like, if you're not proud of who you are, and if you don't understand your history, right, wrong, or indifferent, or good or bad, Harvey, or good, there you go, good, bad, or ugly, you can't erase that. And Jeremy, and what the kick in the nuts was, we're now starting to do what's happened in every failed nation that swings with the pendulum over towards,
right.
I hate this, I don't want to necessarily, because it's not always communism,
No,
socialism.
it could be fascism.
It doesn't bode well. It doesn't bode well. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. And at this juncture, people might be like, well, you know, you're expounding a lot on Russia and you're doing this and doing that. And the reason for that is because, again, you have to understand the potential opponent that you're going to face and understand really what you're facing. And going back to the original point, does NATO realistically understand the people that they want to try and face. Realistically, the only people I think that are actually crazy enough, and I say this with all due respect because I think they're kind of an awesome people, but the Polish, like they're just hard chargers, dude. They're just like, fuck it, give me a rifle, I'll go do whatever. And more power to you, dude. Like if you just want to send dudes undercover, like I mean, and there's a whole other thing there, but
Yeah.
if you want to send your own unmarked military personnel to go die in Ukraine, dude, whatever. Like, and it's admirable with Poland, but I think Poland is the one country that also realistically understands its adversary, maybe without, and that's not also including Finland, right? Finland is very aware of what Russia is about because they have an intimate relationship with Russia in their conflicts. But Poland and Finland are the two countries I think that would stand the greatest chance, albeit they don't have necessarily the largest militaries, but they understand their adversaries. Their downfalls, though, is they've gotten so hateful towards their adversary that they diminish them the same way we diminished the Japs in World War II, which are they're not capable, they're incapable, they're incompetent, blah, 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 blah. Like, you can't do that. But I would say they're the two most capable at this juncture in Europe. Now,
hey, I want to take this. We're at an hour. I
Yep.
almost said a minute. I didn't say it this time, boys and girls. But I want to come back to you on the constitutionality and the entanglements. You know, we probably should wrap this up in about 15 minutes. But the last comment I'm going to make to your point is I think that still ties into our original argument is, okay, why is Poland and Finland just became a NATO? Why? So again, put yourself to Jeremy's point, put yourself in the shoes of the Russians. Put yourself in the shoes of America back even in the 80s. I mean, I think the sentiment was really dying in the 90s. And that's when we were losing the culture wars. But at least in the 80s and the 70s, would we have, like the 60s? Like we're basically saying Mexico is now a Soviet or a Russian proxy state, and we're going to have our military there. And you know what I'm saying? Like, dude, we'd be like, whoa, time the F out. So we're not bringing that up for conversation between Jeremy and I, but I want you to think about that. So like what Jeremy just said, we're expanding, and I want to bring that back. And the reason I'm bringing that up again is I think it goes to it's part of the central argument. It's like, why are we doing that?
Right.
NATO. Why is NATO expanding eastward? The whole reason for NATO has been defeated. It was defeated in the 90s.
Yeah.
So if you want to make the argument that we still need to have a treaty and an organization alliance to help fend off or fight against Russia, well, then let's make a new one, right? I mean, and I'm not now. This is kind of the segue. I'm setting this up for Jeremy. Like, I would make a different argument, but like, well, why are we even in treaties and alliances to begin with? But if you're going to make that argument, well, like, hey, Russia is a threat. Okay, well then let's have a new organization. Let's have a new alliance. Let's have a new treaty, right? So, I mean, look, to Jeremy's, again, to pull a John Pierre, to circle back around to what Jeremy said earlier. We have dissension even amongst NATO states, NATO member states, right? So what does that tell you? Tells you that, like, hey, okay, why are we still doing this? And there's some people like, oh, I'm doing it because America's the big boy on the block, and I got to keep them happy in order to get my economic aid or whatever other, selfish. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's quite legitimate, their own selfish interests, So all right. Hey, Jeremy. So before you give your answer and then take this into why we should be concerned about entanglements from a constitutional perspective.
Look, the only thing I'm going to say is I firmly believe that we are heading towards a point to where NATO will dissolve. I think it's getting to a point to where it is. I think it's going by way of the Soviet states. The only thing I'm going to add to that is when you look at the status of many of these countries that literally some of these countries that boycott, mind you, some of these countries in NATO that boycotted or banned Russian oil are now buying Russian oil again. Why? Because they can't heat their fucking homes. So that being said, I believe that, I shouldn't say I believe, I would find it almost amusingly ironic that if and when the time comes that NATO does dissolve, how ironic would it be if they balkanized the same way post-Soviet states did? Because in the end of the day, like, you look at how desperate of a situation that was, and we've all seen, like, Mark, you were around during the Balkan Wars. That was some messy shit, dude. Yugoslavia, when they balkanized and became their own separate entities, dude. If Europe, if Greater Europe does that after like post NATO, which I think it very well could be, because look, Britain is resource dependent. People, they don't have like, I know people that live in Britain. I talked to a buddy of mine who I'm not going to name here, but I talked to him about hunting. He's like, no, we don't have deer here. We don't have deer here. He's like, we fish, we can fish, but in a lot of places the deer were harvested out. Like, they were run into, not, you know, not extinction, but they're just, it's a non-point. Like, they're it's not a thing. You also have Britain that is very dependent on the United States and many other countries for their resources. If NATO falls apart and Britain or the UK, Greater UK, has nobody else to help them, you're going to sit there and tell me that these countries themselves, Britain, Germany, and all these other countries, maybe not Italy, Germany might stand a chance, but I think these countries would balkanize personally.
Okay,
and in saying that,
so
yeah,
a quick response,
yep,
and let's go into
yep,
the constitutional side, because what you're doing right now is a completely another podcast. And to
oh
me,
yeah,
it's the realist, and this is a
yeah,
real thing. It's called
yep,
realist theory. This is the realist theory of conflict. So Jeremy's
yep,
point. So England is a sea power, right? And it isn't very resource
yep.
wealthy. It's not very rich. That's why we had the
Used to
British
be, but it's not
Empire.
anymore.
What's that?
Used to be, but it's not anymore.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
but Jeremy, it used to be because of the empire it had,
yeah,
of the colonies, right? You know, that's why it
exactly.
became a
Yep.
colonial power. So in realism theory, you know,
Mm-hmm.
wars are basically about, you know, two groups of people who live in close proximity,
Mm-hmm.
and they're competing over limited resources.
That's
That
right.
is realism, and
Yep.
actually that's what I studied, right? So, and I think what you just pointed out is exactly it. I mean,
Yeah.
so again, that's a whole separate podcast. Why
Oh
did
yeah.
England become an empire? Where would they be now if shit hit the fan? The same with
Yeah.
Germany. And to Jeremy's point about balkanization, would you see the greater Alsace-Lorraine? You know, would that be French? Would that be German? What about and I apologize to the people
Yeah.
of Poland and Germany. I'm going to screw this up, but
Yeah.
there's the upper region, which is the northwestern part of Poland. That used to be German territory.
Yep.
What happens then? You know, what about
Yep.
the Sudetenland? What about
Mm-hmm.
you got the Czechoslovakia, and you got the Slovenia, you know, like the Czech
Yep.
Republic, excuse me, like that used to be out. Where
Yep.
will what would that look like if this happens? I mean,
Yeah.
that's a great effing
Yeah.
point right there that I don't think people are taking into consideration,
Dude.
because the moment shit goes south, yeah, the moment shit goes south and resources become sparse, limited, you're going to see all of
Mm-hmm.
these horrible things happen
Yes.
potentially. I mean, that,
And
and into the defense of
yeah.
my school of education for history and security studies, realism, you know, a lot of people don't like realism, but realism it's
hard to
called
swallow.
realism theory for a reason, because it looks at the basic realities of, like, without no emotions, none of this.
Yep.
Well, why do nations go to war? People say, well,
Right.
democratic nations don't go to war. Well, we quote unquote democratic nations don't go to war. Well, we haven't had democratic nations very long, but they
Yeah.
do go to war. There have been conflicts.
100%.
Sometimes it's shooting, sometimes it's other things. Like, so
Yeah.
no, it boils to what Jeremy just said. If this all falls apart and crumbles, what comes next and what that looks like could be a pretty bad picture. That's all. Yep.
Yeah, and so this is going to factor into this pretty well. So let's go on that theory of balkanization or pre-balkanization. If we see we see the harsh downslope of NATO, which I do think that we're starting to see. It's just not that bad yet. I would be willing to put money on the fact that you would start to see some borders shift real fucking quick, because if you have a place like, and let me tell you, Germany might not be doing so hot right now, but what they have a lot of, which allowed them to actually persist as an empire for a long time, they got a lot of hunters. They have a culture of hunting. They have a culture of hunter gatherers, and despite the cultural differences between back then and today, I think Germany's filled with robust people. So if Germany was getting desperate for resources, or another country was getting desperate for resources, you don't think that they wouldn't eye up a smaller country that used to be their ally in NATO and be like, you know, everything's kind of on fire right now, and there's a lot of fires to be put out. I think we're just going to go take all their stuff and call it a day. And you'd see this rule of law break down. So this is going to transfer into this idea, the realm of entanglements, right? Like our founding fathers were opposed to entanglements. Now, what did they mean by entanglement? Entangling alliances, more specifically, were alliances that were anything but temporary. They're alliances that came at great cost to us, that would indebt us, that would put us at a disadvantage, both militarily, strategically, economically, that would siphon from us and not provide anything in return. So an entangling alliance would be things like NATO. They would have been overwhelmingly opposed to something like NATO, even if it was for the greater good, because of the fact that it does put us at a strategic disadvantage in the effect of economy. Our country is, even though that we're the main proprietor, but the point being is,
well, it's disproportionate.
Right. It's siphoning our resources in an alliance that provides us with practically nothing. And it weakens us, whether people want to admit it or not. It weakens us strategically, economically, I would say socially, culturally, as well, and puts us at a disadvantage. Now, if you look at entanglements as well, I would argue the biggest point for entangling alliances is it strips a nation or a country or a people of their sovereignty. Who are we as a people if we don't have our sovereignty as a people as a nation? If you look at countries that are involved in NATO, there is a demand for a bare minimum of contribution, which Germany hasn't met for a long time. And not to pick on Germany, but
but it's true. That's not picking on them.
But the reality of, they make it easy. But in the end of the day, like, there's a bare minimum contribution. And this is kind of why I suggest that I think NATO is really starting to fall apart now. Is it's not just Germany anymore that can't meet these contribution needs and requirements. There's a lot more countries that are not being able to fulfill those. And so if you're and where this comes into the sovereignty is, you have NATO that literally has pressured smaller countries that literally cannot provide this shit to NATO because they need to do it for their own country. They're like, no, your obligation to NATO comes before your country. And I want somebody to tell me where that's not the case, because anybody that goes out and actually does the research, you look at these small countries that are in NATO, there is so much demanded. And this is why Serbia has staved off not being a part of NATO or the EU, because Serbia is smart in the idea of, like, we don't want an outside body to govern how we operate as a nation. Yeah. Why can we not all be like Serbia and be like, nope, we don't owe you shit. If you get into a war, that's none of our fucking problem. Who are we to subject our sovereignty to help you fight your war?
Yeah,
we started it.
Depending on the conflict, we may ally with you, or we may just be neutral, or we may ally with your enemy. Like,
And so when you get into an entangling alliance such as NATO, you don't have the decision of whether or not you want to ally with those people. You're forced into that decision. That's not sovereignty, people.
Nope.
That is not sovereignty. That is anything but sovereignty.
Yeah,
and
Brussels,
as nations,
Brussels making the decision for you.
And the thing of it is again, if you consider yourself a free people, which I think a lot of people, or at least a lot of government officials, consider their nations a free people because it's the West, right? It's the thing that the West brings freedom. But how can you consider yourself a free people if you're at the whim of another organization? And it's not just NATO. There's the UN. There's so many other, and that's a whole other can of worms. But the reality of it is it's the antithesis of being a sovereign country. It deprives a people within their country the ability and the autonomy to conduct business for themselves in a way that they see fit, without without having to ask permission, right? Like countries literally have to be like, look, this is what we're thinking of doing, so on and so forth. We cool? And NATO's like, nope. If it's not going to help you meet the contributions, then no. And again, this is what happens when you allow a larger governing body to come in and say like, well, you have obligations to us, and if you can't meet these, and here's the other thing. If a country can't meet its obligations, and again, most notably these smaller countries in NATO, which they were given this rainbow road of promises, these smaller countries are now finding out that if you don't meet these obligations, well, we're going to have to omit you from these processes because you're not a governing member, which means you don't get a say in this, or you don't get a say in this, or we're going to tariff you on this, or we're going to put a tax on this, or we're going to do it. Again, who is this advantaging? All it's doing is fucking over the country that, in my opinion, like if Ukraine has any sense, when they come out of this conflict, do not allow your people, your government officials, and if they do, you should fucking riot, in my opinion. Do not allow them to bring you into an entangling alliance. You will be far better off without NATO. You will be far better off without the EU. Pick yourself up as a people and do what you have to do to make your country successful, not because Russia says it, not because the United States says it, not because NATO says it. Do your own thing. Become your own people. Take pride in your own country, because a lot of countries in NATO, if not all the countries in NATO, have forgotten what it's like to be a sovereign country with their own sovereign culture and their own sovereign form of nationalism. It's you're literally selling your nation out and your culture out for the sake of people who, in the end of the day, as you can see, don't give a fuck about you. And that's what you get with an entangling alliance. And I will leave the floor there.
Well, I think that's just like a perfect place to even wrap this up. Boys and girls, thanks for watching this video. As you can see, we could sit and talk for hours, and maybe that is what we'll end up doing. Maybe these will be 3-hour-long podcasts in the future, but we're trying to
always do a part 2.
Well, see, there it is. I think actually, Jeremy, that's the smart thing is like, I know there's more things that you want to say. I know there's more things that I want to say. We didn't even get into like historical facts or objective facts, but where you just left it, I think is a great place to leave it, because that was passionate and it was real. Like, and it goes into who we are as Americans. I mean, like, so I'm going to end it. Here's my outro. Jeremy's points, his appeal to the people of Ukraine, is the appeal to every human being out there, no matter what your nation state is. But as an American, I'm gonna take Jeremy's comments and I'm just gonna take it from I'm an American. I don't think I'm special because of that I'm different or better than you. That's not it. I do think though that I am special because I am different than you, right? And there is no other country like America in the history of the world. I hope there will be, 10 or 100 even better versions of America as history progresses, as we progress.
100%.
But in the right here and right now, no one's done what we're fucked up just like everybody else. But we still have things that no one else has. The UK, we've talked about you a whole bunch of times in this video. I'm going to throw you guys under the bus. Your censorship laws that you guys are passing right now, un-effing believable. And you're supposed to be a Western country. I just again, I get sad about some of these things, but to Jeremy's point, that was such a passionate appeal. I would only want to highlight it that, hey, look, we're Americans. We are different, and it's time to get back into being we are different, and we're going to do our own thing. Like a lot of young people who watch this won't remember this. I don't know it because I wasn't alive during this time. But I was alive during the time where my grandparents were a part of this moment in history. So I remember this. We used to take great pride on our neutrality. There used to be a thing like, hey, I don't want anything to do with you. But if you come in and knock on my front door, I'm going to, with ill intent, I'm going to mess you up. And we used to have this attitude. And that is why I think I really like what Jeremy just said. And you got so passionate. I loved it. Entanglements. Don't allow yourself to be entangled in anything. Matter of fact, I didn't really quite know what I was trying to say there until right now, Jeremy. It's not the me and you, and it's not the me and you in Poland, and it's not the me and you in Lithuania or Russia or Ukraine or, you know, Libya, or wherever you are in the world. It's never the me and yous. It's the people that we somehow stupidly keep electing or allowing to be in charge of us.
Yeah.
That's my final comment right there. And that's, and honestly, I just realized that's why I wanted to talk about NATO, because what the hell does NATO have to do with me and you, or somebody from South Dakota or California or, you know, Alabama? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Why are we even doing this stuff?
Yeah.
So my final comment, and I'm gonna turn over to Jeremy for the outro, and his final comments in the outro is like, boys and girls, if you're watching this, ask yourself the same question. Why? It is absolutely within your purview and your rights to ask why questions. Why are we doing this? Why, but why this? Why that? Now, if you're my previous comment, if you're that private in basic training, and the drill sergeant tells you to do push-ups and you start asking why, well, you know, that's when you should probably get your teeth kicked in. Yeah, but you know, I'm not, this isn't that type of scenario, right? This is, we're all citizens. We're all adults now. We're all part of this process. You should be asking why. It's probably the most important and civic thing you can do is questioning your government and why we're doing things. All right, Jeremy, that's my outro. I'm getting some weird light here. It's, boys and girls, it's near the end of the day. Well, the computer tells me it's 7:30, but I really know in the real world it's only 8:30, or correction, 6:30 my time, but because I hate daylight savings. So Jeremy, I'm going to stop spewing my nonsense. I really liked your last comment. Can you add a little bit to that, and then take us out, and I'll just kind of take your cue and I'll stop recording whenever you take us out.
So I want to say that, like, you know, is from what Mark said, that as Americans, we have the fortune of having been born into a nation that was designed by, you know, by men who, through their experiences, had seen, and through their, through their elders' experiences, had seen grave offenses to their liberties and to their rights and stuff like that. And there's a number of documents that led up to our Constitution, and there's a reason that we have the things that we have within, embodied in our Constitution. And my appeal to not only Americans, but my appeal to anybody that's in a NATO country, anybody that's not in a NATO country, my appeal is one that is an appeal to liberty. An appeal to sovereignty, an appeal to being a free people. You have inherent rights as a people, whether you have a constitution that enumerates those things or you don't. It does not matter. Tomorrow, you could take the Constitution sitting in the Library of Congress and burn it, and it does not change what is. They are simply enumerated to remind us that of which we have within the Constitution. We have natural rights as a people. And one area that I want to read, which is the 9th Amendment, which is overwhelmingly important, because to me, it's not only an amendment that speaks to us as Americans, but it's an amendment that speaks to us as the world,
humans,
right?
Humans, yeah. This is humans, natural rights. Yeah. Go for it, dude.
And it says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. What does that mean? What it simply says is, simply because these select rights were enumerated in the Constitution does not mean that is the extent of the rights acknowledged in the Constitution. This is why entangling alliances are less than optimal. This is why entangling alliances are not for the benefit of anybody. Temporary alliances are one thing, and in the United States, there are certain government areas that are allowed to make those alliances, those temporary alliances. And we have a process in doing that. Now, in other countries, that might not be the case, but it doesn't change the fact that you, as a person in your respective country, you have a say, damn well, regardless of whether or not your government recognizes your right or not. And to that, I would say, fuck your government. You, as an individual, have the right to determine your self-determination and where your country goes. you're not at the behest of NATO. You're not at the behest of some person that you may have elected that does not care about you. You are at the behest of what you as an individual and what you as a country decide to take on upon yourself. My appeal, again, is an appeal to liberty. Do not get yourself in entangling alliances. It benefits nobody. It deprives you of your sovereignty. And moreover, it has a very, very malicious way of depriving people of liberties, of rights, and is not conducive of what a free people are, what a liberty-oriented people are. It is the antithesis of what a free people is. And on that note, I'm going to kind of leave it there because, again, it's a simple appeal to liberty to anybody. Liberty is not an American recognition. It is a worldwide recognition. There is a reason that liberty is brought up in Christianity. It's brought up in the Bible. It's what's that?
Just real quickly, just before you get too far afield.
Yeah.
You're 100% correct from my perspective. Liberty is not an American value, right? We didn't come up with it. But what makes us different is we're the first country in the history of humanity that acknowledges everything you just said. And as you've pointed out, that is what is enumerated. That is what's written down. That's codified in that Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights. Yeah. So I think that is a great place to kind of end us on. Give us a little bit if you got one more great little nugget or something, but otherwise, why don't you take us out? Because we're at 125.
Yeah. So on the final note, look, like I was just going to wrap up on, it is a recognized, liberty is recognized through ages. It is recognized through faiths and religions. It is recognized through various forms of government. Rome recognized at one point the individual liberty of a person. And when that was recognized, people for a short amount of time were able to experience as close as they possibly could to what true liberty is like. Look, and Rome wasn't the only nation to recognize this. My point being is liberty has been a constant through humanity in our time as a species on this earth for as long as you can look back. It is quintessential to who we are as humans. We endure and endeavor for liberty. So that being said, I'm going to end it there because I could expound upon this probably for another 6 hours.
I'm biting my tongue right now too, brother. I'm like, there's so many things I want to say about personal freedoms. I mean, individual liberties. Oh, I got the sun in my face. I probably need to see, that's not a good camera-y thing. So I'm kind of ducked over here into the shade. Hey, why don't you say goodbye, everybody? Take everybody out. Hey, I'm going to say goodbye real quickly. Jeremy will take us out. We still are going to come in at about an hour and 30. We did spend about an extra 15 minutes again, just kind of doing some housekeeping and stuff. We'll get better. We're getting shorter, but again, we're training to standards, not to time. And that even right now still feels like I'm rushing this and we're being short about things. But so all I want to say is to each and every one of you, no matter where you are in this world, if you're watching this podcast, you are part of the resistance. You are a human being. You have your own inherent rights, and I respect all that, and I respect you. Now, if you try to kick in my door and steal my shit, well, then we're going to have an issue. But until that moment happens, all right. So, but here's to everybody who's watching. I raise my cup to you as Jeremy takes us out, and I'm hiding from the sun here.
All right, everybody. Hey, we greatly appreciate your time. This is the 3rd episode. We are already steaming ahead, and this is a big deal. So I'm having a great time doing this. I hope you all are having a great time doing this. Mark, I know, is having a good time doing this. And there is so much. I feel like every single time we do this, there's so many different directions we can go, but there's time for that. The good thing of it is we have the ability to do this. We're setting aside the time to do this. And so there's a lot more content going. With that, I hope everybody enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one down the road. That's all I got.
All right, everybody. Be good. I'm going to hit end here, Jeremy. I'll give you a call in a couple minutes, but everybody be good. And stay free. Stay free.
Stay free and look out for one another.
Damn right. Boom. All right, everybody. God bless. Thank you very much for watching Mission Critical Podcast, wrapping up episode 3. Woo!
All right.